Hey everyone, Milton here, and uh, I just recorded this whole video and then went in to edit and realized the sound was absolutely messed up. So starting back over again with the headset on. But I wanted to finally get around to doing a video talking about playing Blades of Khaine in the world of Approved Ops 2025. These videos take a lot of time before I feel comfortable commenting on them. I want to have played all the various TAC ops, played against them, have a lot of reps in, play the new boards, in order to feel like I have something worthwhile to input into the conversation here. So I've finally had a chance to play enough games, learned a lot at Worlds, and I've just been super busy with real life, since then. So finally able to get around to putting this together, and I hope that you all find it useful. I know that there's a lot of folks that have been playing a bunch of games with it already since it's been out for a little while. But I know that there's also a lot of people that are getting into the game that maybe have found the Eldari nerfs in 40K to be a bit much and are trying out Killteam. So again, I hope that you all find this information and this viewpoint really useful in your games. I am joined by a guest today. I've got Zap here with me for the first time in quite a while. And we'll get into it. So the new Approved Ops deck has a number of changes, and all of them are pretty impactful. We've got all new TAC Ops. We've got new map layouts, a whole new map, a whole new board in Tomb World, and almost entirely new crit ops, as well as a new system for determining initiative that no longer has the scouting step. So we're going to talk about all the things that have changed in Approved Ops 2025, sort of in that order. So buckle in. This is not going to be a short video. But first up is TAC Ops. And this is, in my opinion, the biggest topic. The TAC Ops have sort of changed across the board because not only are they different, but a lot of them seem designed so that they are more difficult to score 6 points on. So because last Approved Ops, it was usually the right decision to primary your TAC op because you could reliably get 6 on it. That's going to be harder to do now. You'll find that most games tend to be a little bit lower scoring. There will probably be more draws in your tournament games than there were before, and it means that Blades of Khaine has to try a little bit harder to stay caught up on the crit op. It's more important for us now. So the knock-on effects of TAC ops changing and generally being lower scoring are quite significant. And a big part of the strength of Blades of Khaine is that we have the option, with our team construction, to take any of the TAC op archetypes. And there's only one other team in the game that can say the same, and that's Inquisitorial Agents. So this means that you can really customize your game plan based on the matchup and the board and how you want to approach a TAC op. This is really good, but it also means you have plenty of opportunities to outsmart yourself instead of your opponent, pick the wrong TAC op, and end up in a situation where the game is much harder to win than it needs to be. So it's really important to think about this as soon as you sit down at the table, see what teams across from you, see what the board layout is, and to really think through each of your matchups before you select your operatives that you're bringing to the game. So let's take a look at Recon TAC ops first. I'm not going to read through the full text of each TAC op. I trust that everyone here can read, but I'm going to try and hit on the most important points and why you might want to take them. First up is flank. Flank is quite good. However, there are going to be some matchups where it's really quite bad. So any opposing team that really wants to shove a lot of operatives onto our side of the board is going to be difficult to score flank against. So things like Felgore Ravagers or Goremongers can be quite tough. And any teams that outnumber us badly enough that they can easily kill our operatives on their side of the board can also be pretty risky to take flank into. It's going to be strongest against teams that don't want to come across the board or that have really low APL or want to play a really passive game plan. And Some of the boards in the new approved ops deck are going to be better for flank than others. It is easier to score flank if you're playing a board where you're deploying on the long edge, just because there's less territory you need to cover in order to get to your opponent's half of the board. It's also going to be easier on the Volcus boards that say have a stronghold in the middle of the board where you can potentially get a model into one of the corners of the stronghold where they're really difficult to see and to shoot. Or on a lot of the Tomb World boards, you'll find that there are hallways that straddle the center line where there's room for you to put a model entirely on your opponent's half of the board in a hallway that's going to be difficult to get to, or your opponent will only have one breach point or doorway to get into that space. So it gives you good opportunities to score flank reliably. Those are going to be the situations when you really want to take this. I haven't played flank as much as I probably should. This was, I think, really one of the standout tac ops from the World Championships of Warhammer 2025. A lot of teams did very well with flank, to the point that there's been a lot of discussion online of is flank good for the game? So if you have an opportunity to abuse it, do it. Up next is retrieval. So while flank is a fairly aggressive tac op in that you're pushing your models to the opposing side of the board, retrieval is not. It's going to be harder to get 6 points on retrieval than a couple other attack ops, because you have to do a mission action on each of the 3 objectives and hold those markers at the end of the game. But while it's hard to get 6 points on it, it's usually quite easy to get 4 points on it, because you can usually set up so that your first activation turn 2 is retrieving the center point and running, and it's usually easy to get the home point as well. So retrieval is going to be good for a more passive game plan when you don't want to expose your models to the enemy. So if you think your opponent might be playing dominate or steal intelligence and you really don't want to give up kills, retrieval can be a good way to do that while still scoring a decent number of points. Because even if you're not scoring 6, if your opponent's only getting 1 or 2 on the tac op, that's really good for you. That point differential is more important than your total points. But just remember that it's going to be hard to max. So if you're in a matchup where you don't think you'll be able to keep up on the crit op, then you might want to take something else. Because again, the point differential is the most important part. The third recon tac op is scout enemy movement. Now, a lot of people think scout enemy movement is really bad, and I sort of agree with them. There are some use cases, however. It is awkward in that it's a tac op where you have to do this action multiple times a turn on ready enemy operatives, and your opponent has a chance to deny points by just moving that operative to where you can't see it. That said, I think Blades of Khaine has a couple things going for us that makes this easier than for some other teams. First off, striking scorpions. So you have to be on conceal in order to scout. But a striking scorpion can potentially charge, fight, strike and fade, go back to conceal, dash further up the board, and then scout. So that's pretty good. You're still getting a kill. You're still getting value out of your operative. They're not just moving and scouting. And you can also dash reposition, or reposition onto a point, do a crit op action, and scout, and deal chip damage as well with Patient Stalk Sudden Blow. So Scorpions can still get a lot of value while doing scout actions. I still think it's not a great tac op. However, if you're in one of the few places that plays Beta Decima, then it's actually quite good, because the gantries prevent you from shooting a target if they're shooting through the footprint of a gantry, but it doesn't actually block visibility. So you still have visibility of the model, you just can't shoot at them. So on Beta Decima, it's actually really difficult to stop somebody from maxing out scout enemy movement. Really tough. So that is something you can potentially use to your advantage if you're playing on Beta Decima. Now let's take a look at Seek and Destroy. The first tac op is Sweep and Clear, and don't take this. The reason being that your opponent can pretty well deny you from being able to score this. You have to be killing their operatives on objective markers. And if you're playing into an APL3 team, they can oftentimes, move on to an objective, do the actions they need, and then dash off of it. So you just might not have opportunities to get those kills. And if you're not getting a kill on an objective marker, you are going to be scoring 0 points on this. But if you get a kill on an objective marker, you still have to do a mission action in order to then get the second point. So I think there's just too many conditions here. I think that Blades of Khaine generally need to be using their APL to, to do additional shoot and fight actions. And because there's a lot of crit ops that also have actions that you need to do, I just don't think sweep and clear is very good for us. Luckily, the other two seek and destroy tac ops are pretty good. Let's talk about dominate next. So dominate is a little bit unusual that you do not score it on turning point 2. But if you get kills, you put tokens on your guys, and then you can score that on turns 3 and 4. And I think that Blades of Khaine plays dominate better than a lot of other teams. It is somewhat risky in that you need to be getting kills, and you need your models to survive. So if your game plan is to like go at the start of the turn and throw a Howling Banshee across the board with acrobatics into your enemy's backline and get a double kill, like, great, get those double kills. But you're going to get 2 dominate markers, and then you're going to lose that Banshee immediately, and that's 2 dominate points you won't be able to score. Instead, you generally want to prioritize like getting cleanup kills at the end of turning points, or with a Striking Scorpion or a Dire Avenger, that can get that kill safely. Because Dire Avengers are so good at moving, shooting, and moving again, and ending completely out of visibility, they're really like champions of dominate scoring. This is going to be better into the sort of mid-range or horde teams that need to come up and scrap with us. If they're able to sit back really passively, dominate is not going to be a great option unless you're able to cross the board and really get into them. Now, rout is sort of the opposite of dominate, where dominate encourages you to play pretty safely with your models and get kills and then not die. Rout is the tac op where you need to be within 6 of your opponent's drop zone and kill things. So this is the I've got Howling Banshees coming off the top ropes at you tac op. I think it's decent. I play it in some matchups. If you're into something where you think your Banshees can get double kills, then it's pretty solid. Or if you like have a map where say you're playing on Tomb World, where you're going to want to fight over certain doors and you're going to be in range to get points on route, then it can really be quite good. The problem is that if you get pinned back, you can end up in a situation where you just can't score any points and you end up losing the game pretty hard. So be careful when you pick route. Make sure that it's against a team where you can actually get far enough forward to score it. Excuse me. So that's all of the seek and destroy tac ops. Now let's take a look at security. Okay, the first security tac op is Plant Banner. And, you'll see a lot of Deathwatch players playing Plant Banner. It's quite a good tac op for a lot of teams. And I think that Blades of Khaine play it pretty well, as well as those other teams. So you plant a banner, and you're going to be scrapping over it in the midboard. It can't be near the board edges. It's got to be fairly close to the center of the board. And really what happens with Plant Banner is it forces your opponent to come into it. They want to pick it up, or at least kill you off of it. If you're playing into a team that you outnumber, it's usually going to be easier for you to max out Plant Banner, because even if they do come onto it and kill your model that planted it, you'll still have a chance to clap back and kill their models off of it before the end of the turning point. It gets a little bit risky against teams that can really outnumber you, and just put APL pressure on you for them to yank the banner. And it is unplayable against teams that can allow their guys to do the pickup marker while in engagement. So things like Light Fingers, Rattlings can do it. Kroot can poach your banner. It's super bad. So be very careful that you're not playing it into a team that has an unfair way to pick it up. But otherwise, it's pretty solid as long as you're able to control that area of the board and keep people from contesting it. By the same token, if somebody's playing Plant Banner into you, you really want a plan to kill them off of it and to try and pick it up and take it away. Yeah, that's the best way to win those games, and it's really important, like I mentioned earlier, to consider how you can deny tac op points from your opponent now. The next security tac op is Martyrs, and you should not be playing Martyrs. Martyrs requires you to be losing models on objective markers and then still contesting those markers. While there may be some games where you end up doing a lot of scrapping over markers and you would potentially max this out, I don't think that's the game plan that you ideally want. There's going to be enough games where you're not going to be standing on those objective markers at the end of turning points that I think Martyrs is just a really bad way to approach the game for Blades of Khaine specifically. Our models are squishy and there's not enough of them to be standing in threatened objectives. There just aren't. The final security tac op is Envoy. And Envoy is really good if you outnumber your opponent. So Envoy requires that you get your Envoy wholly within enemy territory. And for the second victory point, they can't have lost any wounds during the turning point. So if your opponent is playing a team where they're going to be really coming up the board into you hard, Envoy can be a little bit risky. If they're able to generate enough pressure where any of your models that you select as your Envoy target, they can potentially deal some damage to before the end of the turning point, then you're not going to be maxing it. But against a lot of these elite teams, they generally have to be pretty cautious because we can put out a lot of damage. They usually can't afford to just rush us in that way. So, if you're playing into something like Deathwatch or Raveners, where there's only 5 of them, they oftentimes have to abandon a certain area of the board. You can just have an Envoy target, go there, run down the board, have somebody else run down the following turn and max out your points that way. Now, Envoy is going to be pretty bad if your opponent outnumbers you, because you move your Envoy target at the end of the turn and then your opponent just walks somebody over and shoots them. And even if they're only dealing 1 damage, you're losing 1 of your potential points. So be very careful about your opponent's model count when you're playing Envoy. And I probably wouldn't even play it into a matchup where my opponent has the same number of models as me. You want to be playing Envoy into somebody that only has 5 or 6 models on the table. Okay, and that brings us to the final archetype category of Infiltration. The first Infiltration tac op is Track Enemy. And I would not probably take Track Enemy. So Track Enemy requires you to be pretty close to enemy models that would be a valid target for your shooting, and you have to be on conceal and can't be a valid target for the enemy. It's a lot of conditions there. While similar to scout enemy movements, I think that Scorpions are going to be better at this than a lot of other models in the game. I think that it is just kind of too many models that you have to risk in order for it to be worth it. I think that in pretty much any matchup, there's going to be a better option for you than Track Enemy, so I wouldn't seriously consider it for competitive play. Up next is Plant Devices, which is similarly, I think, not particularly good. So you have to do an action on objective markers, and then your opponents have to stand on them. So this makes it harder for you to play the crit op if you're maxing out Infiltration, which seems kind of counterintuitive. And oftentimes it's going to be difficult to control like your opponent's home objective in order to be able to plant device on it anyways. So in my opinion, this is probably one to pass on. I think it's probably a bit easier to do than track enemy. But if you're playing Infiltration, I think that the real reason to play Infiltration is for the final attack op, Steal Intelligence. Steal Intelligence is kind of like Confirm Kill from last Approved Ops. When an enemy model is incapacitated, they drop a marker, and you can pick up those markers. When you pick up those markers, you want to pick them up and hold them for the rest of the game. Now, Steal Intelligence is going to require that. Well, actually, there's a couple of ways to get 6 points here. This is one that you can max out. It might be somewhat difficult to max out just because a lot of Blades of Khaine games end up with you trading a lot of models. But if you're able to kill even just one opposing model on turn 2 and nothing else dies for the rest of the game, if you're holding that intelligence marker for the rest of the game, that can net you 4 points for just the one marker. Excuse me. So if you're playing in a game where you think that your opponent might be really passive, Steal Intelligence might be a decent option. If when in doubt, if you're playing against a team that has to come into you, it can also be a decent option just because they'll be dropping their markers closer to your guys. Now, by the same token, if you're playing against a team that has Infiltration, Steal Intelligence is probably what they'll want to play out of the Infiltration archetype. Unless they're Ratlings or something that has a better way to plant devices. Steal Intelligence is going to be really good if you're trying to throw Banshees into them, and then they can kill your Banshee on their side of the board and easily pick up those markers and run away with them. So, if you're playing into one of those matchups, just be very careful. If they play Steal Intelligence, you need to really think through what models you're offering up as trades, because you can easily end up in a situation where you're giving them their 6 stack op points, and there's not a whole lot of ways to stop it, because you've already made those decisions to initiate those trades. So, that gets us through all of the tac ops. Now let's talk a little bit about map layouts. The biggest changes here on Volcus are that you're going to notice a lot of these maps have some light or heavy cover inside some of the strongholds, where the strongholds did not have any terrain inside of them other than the fire steps. So this is a change. It's fine for us. I don't think it makes a huge difference. It is fairly nice that the strongholds with light cover, you can stick a scorpion in there with one with a gloom, and they can sit on points and be hard to shoot. So that's always good. But Volcus hasn't changed a ton. Tomb World has changed. Well, Tomb World is quite different than ITD. One, because it has scatter terrain, which our Vermont crew has been saying people should have been playing scatter terrain on Tomb World the whole time, or on Into the Dark the whole time. So I guess GW agrees with us, and I think that's really good for Blades of Khaine because it gives you places to actually stage models and to hide, which is nice. The other big differences are going to be the breach points, which were not really a thing before. It's going to be very important for you to read through exactly how the breach action works and how it interacts with piercing weapons, and to be very aware if your opponent's team has anything that allows them to do mission actions for 1 APL less. Even though we don't have any piercing, a lot of people do, and it's just super important to know when people can breach a door and still go through and do something, right? Especially Deathwatch, they have a lot of ways to get a model to breach a point, move through and shoot, and can do that with blasting. Can potentially get double kills if you're not aware of the sequencing of models and how many actions it's going to take them to get to certain places. You can just blunder games away that you don't need to be losing. So check that. Make sure that you're well aware of how that rule functions. Also really important to be aware of how the teleport pads function. Read through that. A lot of games, they end up not mattering, but I've also had some games where they've been hugely important. They're also super fun. So try and make use of them if you get a chance. Just be very aware of exactly how those function because it's super important to your winning games. Um, the other things that changed, we've got almost entirely new crit ops. So I think this largely doesn't make a huge difference for Blades of Khaine compared to other teams. Um, Generally, we're trying to win on the tac op and the kill op more than the crit op. Obviously, if you want to score as many points as you can on the crit op, if you've got a way to do it safely, but you don't want to throw away too much material in order to do it just because we only have 8 models to work with and they're all pretty squishy. That said, um, my biggest piece of advice here is even if you're a pretty experienced player, even if you've been playing a bunch of tournaments with a new approved ops deck, when you sit down to the table, just reread your crit op. Do it every time, no matter what. Because I've certainly made mistakes on the crit op and lost games because of it. Just stupid errors I didn't need to be making. I've also had plenty of games where both me and my opponent will be really excited to get into the next turning point. We're 1 or 2 activations in, and then we realize, like, oh, damn, we're playing stake claim and we didn't do the gambit of which objective turns off. And then it's hard to like rewind the game appropriately because things have already happened. Just take a deep breath, be intentional about the crit op, make sure you understand exactly what you need to do, because several of these are a bit more complicated than a lot of the crit ops last time. And I think that most of them, Blades of Khaine, have fine play into. I think that there's some where like certain teams are going to be a little bit advantaged, which can be rough. Like playing Orb into something like Kroot or energy cells into Kroot is rough. Yeah, it's real rough, but it can be done. You just need to be really careful about what they can actually do and and control space so they're not like bumping the orb back onto your home objective and shutting you out of the game that way. So that gets us through almost everything. The last major change is the new system for initiative. They have removed scouting from the pregame steps. So there's no more scouting to get the scouting reposition, the extra piece of equipment, or the free ploy. Now, and almost nobody ever took the free ploy previously. And most of the time, people took the extra equipment unless they were trying to win initiative or intentionally like control that. That's all different. Now there's the system where for the first initiative roll in the pregame step, whoever does not pick which side of the board they want gets a reroll card. And then in every subsequent initiative roll, whoever loses the roll gets a card to add or subtract from a future initiative roll. Now, I think this is actually pretty good for Blades of Khaine. Or at least gives us an interesting tool that we can use better than some teams can use it. Anytime that you're able to really reliably have an expected outcome on an initiative roll, that allows you to play the end of the turning point differently because you're like, okay, like I can reliably go first next time, right? So it can let you play more aggressively, deal more damage, knowing that you can then go first and like go again. Having a model like charge, fight, shoot, last activation, then first activation, charge, fight, shoot is huge. Like into a horde team, if you're like getting a 1 for 4, that's crazy value, right? Even into elite teams, if you're killing like 1.5 Space Marines in exchange for 1 elf, great. Like you take that trade, right? So yeah, anything where you can control initiative is quite good, especially because we have tools like Dance of Death that can let us do weird things that people don't see coming. So this combined with the equipment to add or subtract D3 from an initiative roll once per game can be quite strong. If you let your opponent pick the side of the board that they want, as long as it's not a map where that really super matters, because there are some. And you have a reroll, and then you like let your opponent, or your opponent wins the roll. Like you can go into turn 2 or 3 with really, really high odds of winning that initiative roll, and then play to that. And I think that's some of the strongest stuff that Blades of Khaine can do is when we have that setup. Now, you just might not get those cards, in which case it sucks. But I think it's worth playing around, because even if you're just using the Rune of Foresight to modify, like to lose initiative rolls, so that you can get the +2 or the +3 card to use later in the game, that can be really good. Now, if you're doing that, I think that it kind of pushes Blades of Khaine into some kind of all or nothing plays, which is a little bit risky. But if you're going into expended operatives, like with our shooting pieces, we're reliable enough that I think that's still a pretty good, like a pretty reliable proposition there. And in a lot of those matchups, that's kind of what you want to be doing anyways, is, especially in an elite dominated meta, playing at the end of the turning point and hoping to win initiative, because it's the best way to force through a lot of damage unanswered, right? So just worth thinking about. I think, to that note, because you can no longer get extra equipment through scouting, we're limited to 4 pieces of equipment now, which means that it's harder to take like stuff that would be nice. I find that I'm taking fewer smoke grenades, because there's also been recent changes to smoke grenades such that they don't ignore piercing 1. That's rough. A lot of teams, there's some teams that like Vespids that have mass piercing 1. Smokes are still okay into them, but they're not amazing, because you're just getting the obscuring, right? And a lot of times, excuse me, if you're playing on Volcus, you can usually position such that you're getting obscuring anyways, unless they get quite close to you, in which case they'd ignore the smoke anyways. So yeah, I'm taking fewer smoke grenades. I'm taking fewer crack grenades, because into Space Marines, a ceaseless crack grenade deals marginally more damage on average than a ceaseless shuriken pistol. But it's not by a whole lot. Like we're talking fractions of a point here. And when you've only got 4 equipment points to use, and I really want to be taking the Rune of Shielding, the Wraithbone Talisman, and the rune to add or subtract from an initiative roll, I've really only got one other choice of like something that would be nice. And oftentimes I find that I'm using that for Razor Wire, if it's a map that's good for it, or on Tomb World, I might want a heavy barricade or light barricades. It depends, or maybe even ladders on certain maps. But I just find it harder to afford crack grenades and smoke grenades now. But I think it is very important to take the rune to modify initiative rolls, because that can potentially play into the new initiative system very well and lead to some really big explosive plays that can change games. So those are all of the big changes in the new approved ops deck. Now I want to talk a little bit about the metagame and just sort of what's going on more broadly. There's been a lot of discussion recently about power creep in Killteam. I think there's been some power creep. I think that, Deathwatch, Canoptech, and Wolf Scouts, which are 3 of the last 4 teams released, are quite strong, and Goremongers and Sanctifiers are also quite good. So, those are teams that you've got to play around. I think Blades of Khaine have the tools to do it. They might not be easy games, but we're better positioned to do it than a number of other teams in the metagame, which I think is part of the reason that you've probably seen, more people moving into Blades of Khaine in the last handful of months. I think that there's also likely going to be some nerfs to those teams in the upcoming balanced data slates. So we don't really know what's going to happen exactly yet. We'll hopefully see in the next month. I think the Blades of Khaine are in a decent place. I think that, that said, last year's approved ops were a little bit better for the team than approved ops 2025. I'm not trying to be full of doom. I've been, I think, consistently the biggest cheerleader for Blades of Khaine in the world, um, which is a weird distinction to have, but here we are. Um, I think that they're certainly a team that has the tools to win big events, but you have to be really good with them. You have to really have a good game plan going into the matchup, and you have to be very careful because they're a very fragile team. And against some of these teams that have really high durability paired with a lot of offensive output, where just like Deathwatch pistols with special issue ammunition can one-shot our models with decent reliability. Yeah, you have to outplay your opponents to a certain extent, and it can be done, and it's really satisfying to do it. Blades of Khaine are hands down still my favorite team. I occasionally play other things for a little bit, and then I always come back to Blades of Khaine because I just have the most fun with it, and I think that they're really good and have what it takes. Um, so I wouldn't say we're in like a hostile metagame, but I would say we're in a metagame that the top teams are a little bit unbalanced, and we're sort of nipping at their heels, which with nerfs could mean that Blades of Khaine are going to be very well positioned. Um, there's just no way to tell yet. So hopefully we find out soon. I'll probably do another video once we get the new balance data slate in January. But until then, I hope this has been very helpful, both for those of you that have been playing tournament games with a team and for those of you that are looking to get into tournament play. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe to the channel. I do appreciate it. I am, now that I'm finally back, trying to work on growing the channel, and hopefully I see you across the table soon at an event. Bye.